Hey everyone, welcome to the I303 podcast with your host David Prieto. Here I share my ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the idea of reverse evaluations. It's where employees evaluate supervisors rather than supervisors evaluating employees. And this is a concept I've come across pretty recently where the idea popped up in terms of why are evaluations top-down? Why do they go from supervisor to employee? Who created the evaluation process where this is the default and this is the structure that most organizations utilize today? Before we take a deep dive into reverse evaluations, I first want to provide a high-level overview into what most evaluations look like today. So as I touched upon, they are typically top-down where it's supervisor to employee. And one of the issues or one of the drawbacks with that form of evaluation is that supervisors only look at a slice of performance from their employees. So they don't get to look at their performance holistically. And instead, it's more in spurts and fits where they try to incorporate their one interaction into an overall evaluation of performance. As a result of that, in the field of IO, that tends to look at typical versus maximal performance. So as we know from an employee's perspective, when we know our supervisor is going to be evaluating us or be there on site to be able to see our performance, we're typically going to try to do our best, and that leads to maximal performance. And the difference between maximal performance versus typical performance is we can't redline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're typically only going to do so when we know we're being evaluated or when we know our supervisor is going to be having their eye on us. And so in those instances, that's when we perform maximally. But that is not an accurate representation of how employees typically perform, what their work looks like on a day-to-day basis. And so that's another issue in doing top-down supervisor to employee performance, is that there's only a slice of actual performance that's being observed, and it may not be a true representation of someone's typical workday. Instead, employees are incentivized to perform to their best of their ability when they're being supervised, and their supervisor is going to be there to evaluate their performance. So is that an accurate representation of performance? We don't know. Another issue is it typically happens once a year, maybe twice a year if an organization has their evaluation process in line. But for the most part, supervisors are going to come around, evaluate performance once a year, check a couple of boxes, boom, that's the end of the evaluation. And it may or may not involve a conversation. I know from my perspective, it's been hit or miss with the different organizations I've worked with in the past. Sometimes there's a performance conversation, sometimes there isn't, and so I don't always have a voice or have a say in terms of what my performance is or how it's been evaluated, or if I agree or align with the perspective and the evaluation my supervisor is providing me. There are instances where maybe I didn't necessarily agree, that I thought my performance was better than it should have been ranked. On the flip side, there's been the opposite where, I've been given the benefit of the doubt and maybe my performance could have been a little bit better. But that's the issue with performance evaluations when they're top down, when there's only that slice, when looking at maximal versus typical performance, and when it happens once a year. So again, typical evaluations are not necessarily the best, especially when they're top down. Overall, based on conversations I've had with different individuals, not everybody is a fan of the way current evaluation processes are structured. I mean, supervisors don't like having that conversation, employees are reluctant to have that conversation, and it's not the best experience for both individuals involved. So that got me to thinking, is there an alternative approach or a different way evaluations should take place? So I want you to take that information and everything that I've shared now and kind of put it on the back burner. Let it simmer there, let it sit there for a little while, and let it percolate. Evaluations are this way, top down, slice of performance, typically conducted once a year. Typically there's no conversation. That's how performance evaluations are currently taking place. So keep that in the back of your mind. I'm going to transition a little bit, but I'll get back to that point in a little bit later. So now we're going to transition over into different economic systems that have progressed over, since humans have evolved to be able to have economic systems. So a lot of this information I'm going to share now comes from podcasts I listen to by Dr. Richard Wolff, professor of economics. I think he graduated both from Stanford and Harvard. You might have to fact check me on that. I don't remember off the top of my head. But essentially, he hosts the podcast Democracy at Work, and he has an interesting perspective when it comes to how individuals should approach work in today's environment. So, the three major economic systems that Richard Wolff has indicated have taken place as humans have progressed through time are as follows. So, initially, slavery was the predominant economic system, where slaves were beholden to their masters. Slaves were told what to do, when to do it, with very little say or virtually none. They were slaves, so they couldn't say what to do when they wanted to do it. Essentially, it was do as you were told, or slaves would have to face the repercussions of that situation. Eventually, humans progressed and we transitioned into a different version of that economic system. According to Richard Wolff, we transitioned into more of a feudalism type of approach, where there were serfs and peasants who were there to serve the whims of the lords and kings. Here again, lords and kings dictated to serfs, peasants, and anyone who was under their rule what to do and when to do it. Here again, serfs, peasants, people who were under the rule of a lord or a king had very little to say in terms of what they could do and when they can do it. The third and most recent form of economic system, the one that seems to be touted across the globe as the most economically viable, the one that leads to individuals progressing out of poverty at the highest rate, is capitalism. And here, there is a unique situation, very similar to that between serf and peasant and lord to king, and very similar to that of slave and master. Here we have employee and employer. Similar dynamic, where an employer dictates to the employee what to do and when to do it. So in the progression of these different economic systems, there's always been an individual who had the power, the knowledge, or the ability to be able to tell an underling or someone under their supervision what to do and when to do it. So those are the different economic systems that have progressed as a human society over the years. Now keep that in mind. Now we're going to transition over into different forms of government and how they've changed over years past, some more than others, but this for the most part is how, as a society, we've decided how a government should rule over the citizens that it oversees. So initially we started with an autocratic form of government. Here is where there is one ruler who essentially dictates what everybody under his rule is going to adhere to. Another form, which we've slowly progressed to, is an oligarchic form of government. This is where a small group of individuals essentially come together and decide what they feel is the best way to rule or govern a particular society. We transitioned from autocratic, one person, oligarchic, a small group, to more democratic, where now individuals who are being ruled have a say in what is going to happen within their land, or how the government should rule them in making sure everybody has, equal say, has a voice in deciding how they're going to be ruled. So we have all these different factors happening at the same time. We have different forms of government that are being created, transitioning from autocratic, oligarchic to democratic. We also have different economic systems that are influencing how individuals interact with one another on an economic perspective, where we have slavery, we have feudalism, and we have capitalism. So here we have two different forms of economic activity that's happening and government activity that's also happening. So from the economic perspective, we have, for the most part, a ruling class or a ruling individual dictating how individuals under their rule should behave. On the flip side, we also have this government experience, or this government approach, where elected officials, they're provided guidelines and insights into how people want to be ruled. So from an economic perspective, we're okay with, or we are okay. History has demonstrated that for the most part, individuals are okay with an individual being on top and telling others under their rule what to do, whether it was master slave, lord and king to serf peasant, or employer to employee. In that economic system, individuals seem to be okay with being told what to do, but from a government perspective, individuals do not like being told what to do. And the whole reason the United States came into existence is to tear away from the tyranny of the monarch in the UK. The founding fathers essentially found the benefit of a democratic system where individuals have a voice or have a say into how they're being ruled. So from an economic perspective, top down is okay, but from a government perspective, that is not okay. And it seems as though we have these clashing priorities or these clashing perspectives right now that are taking place in the workplace. So when it comes to how we're being ruled, what laws should take in effect, how we should interact with one another from a government perspective, we're very open to the idea that it should be a democratic process, that individuals should have a voice, and that individuals who are in supervisory or elected roles should be just that, elected. So from a ruling or government perspective, that's how individuals prefer to have their government rule over others. Now the question I have, or the insight that I have, is can that same philosophy or can that same approach be applied into the workplace? Can it also be applied into the business world? And that got me thinking, if we can elect governors, senators, representatives, presidents, should individuals in the workplace not also have the opportunity, or at least the idea, to also elect those who are going to be directly supervising over them? So shouldn't individuals who are going to be governed or supervised by an individual have a voice in who that person is going to be? Shouldn't they have the opportunity to vote in who their supervisor is going to be? And by extension, if that's the case, shouldn't employees then have the opportunity to engage in reverse evaluations, to be able to evaluate the supervisor's performance rather than the supervisor evaluating the employee's performance? I don't know the right answer to that, but this is an idea I've had, and I wonder if this approach can work or has worked with other organizations in the past. Interestingly enough, I found out that there is a worker co-op located in Spain, and it's one of the most successful in the entire globe. And essentially the way their supervisors are selected is employees have an opportunity to vote in who they want to be their supervisor. And once that individual has been voted in, employees then have the opportunity to evaluate their performance. So instead of it being top down, supervisor to employee, this company called Mondragon essentially has their employees evaluate their supervisors. And employees get to decide, should this individual remain a supervisor, or do we have someone else who we feel would be a better leader? And we can start seeing the parallels here, where if the United States did not like who the current president is, the current leader, they have the opportunity to vote in someone very different, someone who aligns with different priorities or different expectations. In this instance, the president is democratically selected or elected to rule over an entire nation. Can the same hold true, or should the same hold true for individuals in a business environment? I don't know. And it seemed as though this worked in Spain when it comes to Mondragon. I was curious to find out if this approach or if this philosophy has worked in the United States. And I actually found out by attending a Qualtrics conference not too long ago held in Salt Lake City, their X4 conference they called it. Coca-Cola is actually in the process of experimenting with this approach to work. So I had a chance to attend an in-person seminar held by the VP of, I forget the exact title, but essentially she was responsible for developing talent management initiatives for global Coca-Cola. And she shared that they're experimenting with a new approach where leadership is evaluated very differently than leadership had been evaluated prior to 2020. So this new initiative they were engaging in was a new experiment they were running in 2020 to see if leadership should be evaluated differently, primarily enabling and encourage employees to evaluate the performance of their supervisors. Coca-Cola recognized that this would place leaders in a very difficult, if not impossible situation. But it would really quickly and really easily filter out individuals who did not have the skill set to be able to be effective leaders. So in order to create that shared vision, to have that democratic approach, to be able to listen to employees, to be able to align and inspire, Coca-Cola quickly realized we need to have leaders who have that skill set and who can empower and engage employees to do the best work that they can. And leaders have a very interesting position within an organizational hierarchy. There is one person, typically, when looking top down, that one person can have significant impact on many individuals they supervise. And if that's the case, if one person can have such a significant impact on an organization where they can influence anywhere between 5, 10, 15 employees, shouldn't that individual's evaluation be top of mind? Shouldn't evaluations take place there at that linchpin where one supervisor can impact anywhere between 5 and 20 employees? Shouldn't that be the critical data point that most organizations should take into consideration when conducting evaluations, rather than looking at individual employees who have, a moderate, if not insignificant, impact on overall organizational performance? So rather than taking evaluations down at the employee level and seeing which employees are performing well versus which are not, I would actually recommend that I think evaluations are more critical at that supervisor level, especially when employees are provided the opportunity to evaluate their supervisors. So going back to Coca-Cola, they recognized this would put leaders in a precarious situation. And they started to see that the skill set needed to be a leader is very different than the skill set needed to be someone who's a knowledge worker or who has technical expertise. And as we continue to leverage technology more and more in our society and business at large, I'm starting to feel those two skill sets they should be more in aligned than they are. And I'm actually starting to see this in Silicon Valley, where technical experts are viewed with just as much prestige and just as much reverence as individuals who are in leadership positions. And the reason this is new to me and new to a new approach to most individuals in Silicon Valley is that leaders were typically viewed as more prestigious than their technical knowledge counterparts. That in order to progress up an organization or in order to gain respect from individuals had to transition into more leadership roles. But I think Silicon Valley, who is typically on the forefront of more progressive or newer approaches to talent management, they're recognizing there's this bifurcation where there's leadership skill set and technical skill set, and they're both equally valuable to the successful performance of an organization overall. And so going back to evaluations and where they should take place, I'm wondering if supervisor evaluations and employee evaluations should be weighted equally, with both being able to evaluate the performance of each other. Now, IO has tiptoed in this area with the advent of 360 evaluations. And essentially, real quick, 360 evaluation is when typically a leader, manager, supervisor, they are offered evaluations from a supervisor's perspective, a coworker's perspective, a subordinate's perspective, and potentially a customer's perspective as well. So it's a 360 evaluation on someone's performance. However, that typically is not the norm. As I touched upon a little bit earlier, or at the beginning of this podcast, what is the norm is top-down, supervisor to employee, once a year, virtually no conversation. That is the predominant way performance is evaluated. And what I'm recommending is we actually flip that on its head. That if we want to live in a democratic society, we have to consider, should our leaders be elected? Not only outside of the workplace, but potentially within the workplace. And that would be my question to all my listeners today, is reverse evaluations. What are your thoughts? Do we think this is a viable alternative to the way evaluations are currently taking place? If we want to continue moving forward in a democratic society, should that be something we consider? Or are we okay with supervisors being selected, them dictating who does what and when, and performance evaluations happening from top down? And that is the question I leave all of you with today is, which directions should performance evaluations take place? Top down, bottom up, or a little bit of both? Curious to hear what your thoughts are, and thank you for listening. I'll catch you all in the next episode.